The $3 million Porsche 918 Spyder sat motionless in the center of the testing floor, its engine cover raised like a dare nobody wanted to accept. Amelia Sterling, chief executive of Sterling Dynamics, told the gathered board that even the German engineers flown in from Porsche itself could not explain why the engine kept dying at the exact moment their billion-dollar contract depended on it running flawlessly. Several of the specialists exchanged a smile when Owen Carter, a maintenance technician in a faded work jacket, stepped forward carrying nothing but a flashlight and an old steel toolbox. He knelt beside the car, touched a single wire near the firewall, and asked a question that made the entire room go still. Who had serviced this vehicle the night before it first failed? Stay until the end, because the truth hidden beneath that hood would save the Porsche and topple an empire built on silence. Sterling Dynamics had spent 8 months preparing for a single private demonstration in front of representatives from Northbridge Capital, an investment fund whose signature would unlock $1.8 billion for a new generation of hybrid performance systems. Everything in the company's future depended on one car performing perfectly for 11 minutes on a closed track outside Atlanta, Georgia. That car was a silver Porsche 918 Spyder that had once belonged to Amelia's late father, the man who built the company from a two-bay garage into a firm respected across the automotive industry. Sterling Dynamics had installed an experimental control module into the vehicle's hybrid drivetrain, a system meant to prove the company could manage the transition between electric and combustion power more efficiently than any competitor on the market. For the first 2 weeks of testing, the results were extraordinary, and Amelia allowed herself to believe the hardest part of the project was already behind them. Then, 3 weeks before the scheduled demonstration, the car began to fail in a way nobody could explain. The failure never appeared on command and never repeated itself the same way twice. The car started normally every time. Every electronic readout stayed within acceptable range, the battery pack never overheated, and the combustion engine and electric motor each performed flawlessly when tested independently. But whenever the car shifted from pure electric power into the combined hybrid mode under heavy load, the entire system shut down without warning, as if some invisible hand had pulled the plug. A few minutes later, the car would restart and behave as though nothing had ever gone wrong, leaving no trace for the engineers to chase. Sterling's own team replaced sensors, rewrote software, and tested the battery pack from every possible angle, and none of it made a difference. Desperate, Amelia requested direct support from Porsche's headquarters in Germany, and within days Sebastian Cole arrived in Atlanta with 2 additional specialists at his side. Sebastian was proud, precise, and deeply trusted within the company for his encyclopedic knowledge of the vehicle's factory specifications. His team spent nearly a week running the car through every certified diagnostic sequence Porsche possessed, yet they never once produced a reliable fault code they could point to with confidence. Meanwhile, Adrian Blake, the company's chief strategy officer, had begun quietly suggesting to certain board members that Amelia had gambled the entire future of Sterling Dynamics on a project that was fundamentally unstable. He proposed delaying the demonstration, fully aware that any delay would give Northbridge Capital the legal right to walk away from the deal entirely. While the engineers argued in the testing bay, Owen was working nearby, repairing a ventilation unit just outside the room, when he heard the Porsche start and caught something the others had missed entirely. A single, almost imperceptible sound landed less than a second before the system tried to shift into hybrid mode. He stopped what he was doing, turned toward the glass wall of the testing bay, and said nothing to anyone. On his way out that evening, Owen noticed a small drop of clear liquid on the polished concrete floor near the Porsche's rear wheel. It did not smell like engine oil, and it did not smell like coolant either. He crouched down, studied it for a long moment under the overhead lights, and then wiped it away with a cloth before anyone else arrived. Whatever it was, it did not belong there, and Owen Carter had spent enough years around machines to know that liquids never appeared without a reason. The morning of the demonstration arrived with the board of directors, representatives from Northbridge Capital, and the full Porsche engineering team gathered around the testing bay in tense anticipation. The Porsche was mounted on the dynamometer, cables and sensors trailing from every access panel, and for the first run every single reading came back perfect. Amelia allowed herself a small breath of relief, convinced that the final software update had finally solved the mystery that had haunted the project for weeks. Then, as the load increased toward the threshold required for the investors to sign off, the car lost power instantly, the dashboard went dark, and the cooling fans spun down to silence in the space of a single heartbeat. The demonstration ended before it had truly begun, and the room filled with the particular kind of quiet that follows a very expensive failure. The Northbridge representatives gave Amelia exactly 2 hours to produce a credible technical explanation, warning that without one they would freeze the negotiations indefinitely. Sebastian insisted his team had already inspected every factory-certified component in the vehicle and found nothing wrong, while Lucas Bennett, the head of Sterling's research division, insisted with equal confidence that the company's own hybrid module was blameless. The two sides began, quietly and carefully, to shift responsibility onto one another, each unwilling to be the name attached to a billion-dollar failure. It was in the middle of that tension that Owen walked into the room and asked, without raising his voice, if he could take a look at the car himself. Lucas laughed before Owen finished the sentence, asking the room at large what a building maintenance technician could possibly understand that an international team of engineers had missed. That Adrian added loudly enough for the investors to hear that they were dealing with a multi-million-dollar Porsche, not some old sedan pulled out of a family garage. A ripple of laughter moved through a few of the board members, and even Amelia, though she said nothing cruel, did not believe for a moment that Owen could offer anything useful. What she did notice, almost without meaning to, was that Owen was not looking at any of the diagnostic screens at all. He was looking at the floor, at marks and smudges the rest of the room had never once considered. Owen asked how the car had been transported the night before its very first failure. Nobody answered right away. He asked next who had opened the battery compartment, since the maintenance log showed no record of that panel ever being removed. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. He pointed to a single bolt with a fresh scratch across its head, and Lucas immediately dismissed it as an ordinary sign of routine servicing, the kind of mark any technician might leave behind without thinking twice. Owen did not argue the point. He simply crouched down, opened a small access cover near the wheel well, and found a wiring clip that had been swapped for one that looked almost identical to the factory original, but was rated for a noticeably lower temperature tolerance. Sebastian examined it himself and quietly confirmed that Owen was right, though he was quick to add that a single mismatched clip could not possibly explain a total system shutdown on its own. Lucas seized on that detail immediately, using it as fresh ammunition to mock Owen's intrusion into a problem that belonged to trained engineers. Owen answered calmly that the clip was never meant to be the cause. It was there to make sure they were all looking in the wrong direction. Amelia agreed to give Owen exactly 3 minutes to examine the car, on the strict condition that he not remove any critical component without permission. He refused the diagnostic tablet offered to him and instead asked that the air conditioning, the backup generator, and every other source of ambient noise in the room be switched off entirely. With a simple flashlight, he traced the coolant lines, studied the wiring harness behind the electric motor, checked the grounding point of the low-voltage system, and examined the dust pattern around a connector that should never have been disturbed during routine maintenance. He asked Sebastian to start the car in pure electric mode without touching the accelerator, then rested his palm flat against the subframe to feel the vibration traveling through the metal itself. When the moment came to shift into hybrid mode, Owen heard a relay click twice instead of once, a sound so small that no microphone in the room had been positioned to catch it. He immediately asked for the engine to be shut down. He explained to the stunned engineers that the system had not actually broken down during operation at all. It had been forced to shut itself off after receiving 2 contradictory signals about temperature and pressure at nearly the same instant. The car's main computer only recorded the final signal it received, which meant the very first fault code vanished before it could ever be saved to memory, leaving investigators with nothing to chase. Sebastian's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine attention, because what Owen described was rare but entirely plausible under the right conditions. Lucas protested that every sensor in the system had already been replaced with new units, certain that this ruled out any possibility of tampering. Owen asked a simple question in response, wanting to know whether they had replaced the sensors themselves or only the signal wires running to them. Nobody in the room could answer. Amelia realized in that moment that her own team had assumed the sensors were the source of the fault without ever tracing the wiring back to its origin. Owen located a section of cable that had been rewrapped with unusual care, and inside its protective sheath he found a microscopic resistor, deliberately placed so that it would only alter the signal once the engine bay reached a very specific temperature. That single detail explained everything, why the car performed flawlessly during short tests but failed consistently under heavy sustained load, exactly the condition a real demonstration would require. Lucas suggested it might be nothing more than a forgotten piece of prototype wiring left over from an earlier experiment, still unwilling to accept what the evidence suggested. Owen pointed to the solder joint itself, made by hand with an alloy that had never once been used inside a Porsche factory. This was not a manufacturing defect. This was a deliberate act of interference. When Catherine Reed, the company's lead legal counsel, pulled the security logs from that section of the building, she discovered that 17 full minutes of camera footage from the testing bay had been deleted without explanation. Amelia ordered the testing bay sealed and instructed her staff to say nothing to the investors until they understood what they were truly dealing with. Adrian objected immediately, arguing that raising the word sabotage without solid proof would only spread panic through the board, and he suggested instead that they quietly blame a defective aftermarket part and close the internal investigation before it went any further. Owen continued studying the tampered wire, and something about the placement of the resistor and the careful wrapping around it reminded him of a technique he had encountered years earlier during durability testing on an entirely different hybrid platform overseas. Sebastian asked him directly where he had learned that kind of method, and Owen deflected the question, saying only that he had once worked around systems built along similar lines. Lucas, suspicious and a little embarrassed by his earlier dismissiveness, quietly pulled Owen's personnel file to see what he was truly dealing with. The file listed nothing more than a technical associate's degree and a string of jobs at small independent repair shops, which only reinforced Lucas's assumption that Owen had been exaggerating his own experience. Sebastian, however, later found Owen's name buried inside an old technical research paper, listed as a co-author on a patent describing a mechanism for transferring energy between a combustion engine and an electric motor with remarkable efficiency. The patent had been registered years earlier under the name of a components supplier that no longer existed, having quietly folded not long after the filing. When Amelia confronted him directly, Owen finally admitted the truth. He had once been a development engineer working on hybrid drivetrain systems for a European supplier, a job that had once defined his entire professional identity. Years earlier, he had discovered that a superior at that company was hiding a serious safety flaw in a prototype vehicle undergoing testing, and when Owen refused to sign off on a report he knew to be false, the company found a way to place the blame on him instead, ending his career in the industry almost overnight. During that same difficult period, his wife passed away, and Owen returned to the United States determined to find work that would let him raise his daughter without the crushing pressure that had once defined his professional life. He had no interest in reliving that chapter of his life.